meaning every 3 months we'll be meeting. And then he also said, now we want to request you that we may be available when we have meetings with the judges, with the magistrates. He actually asked me in the next 2 weeks, they'll be having a big conference for the magistrates. So he invited me to speak. So that was the event yesterday. It was very, very good. And he launched it. He said, why should we give God only one day in a year? Why do we do it once? So let's do it 4 times a year. I think that was a good day, personally, I think. And having given us a big door opened in the judiciary, that's something that can be really, we can thank God for, because other nations, our friends here, who are coming from other nations like the US, they can no longer have something like this where we can talk freely about God. So I want to thank God about that, the impact of God's word. So now I want to share something about what I shared and how some of these principles are key for us to know, but also to be able to disseminate them, because why I'm sharing them is because you who are listening to me, you are praying. We intend to have, our intention is that God's truth will permeate every sphere of society, that our nations will be nations that will fear and love God. And so that is the purpose today, not yesterday. I could not get connected. I tried, I don't know what happened, but I tried to connect after the meeting, but I couldn't. So I will understand where the problem was. Let me just continue sharing what we started on. We had started on sharing some key principles about administering justice in a nation and the importance of the rule of law. I shared a bit about that in the National Prayer Breakfast, the Judiciary Breakfast. One of the principles here is principle of righteousness and justice. We saw that God.
Bishop, the slides are not.
They're not
I think
showing.
we're looking at a whole different slide. We're looking at a slide in Luganda.
In what?
That's a slide that is showing.
You see, you have another slide. Wow. How about that?
Yeah, that's it. Principle 3, righteousness and justice.
Thank you, Liz. You're very observant and you're alert. Thank you. You can now see the principle of righteousness. Did you see the photos?
Yes, we saw one photo.
Oh, you only saw one photo?
Yes.
Well, sometimes I don't understand why it behaves like that, but if you lose the screen, let me know. So one of the principles is righteousness and justice. Let me just recap briefly for those who are not with us. Let me recap. We're looking at key principles in administering justice in a nation. And Micah 6:8 was the key verse. He has shown you, O man, what is good and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. This is the requirement of God, to do justly. For judges, for magistrates, for judicial officers, this is key. And we saw that the Lord himself, God is the supreme judge of the universe, based on Isaiah 33, verse 22. The Lord is our judge. The Lord is our lawgiver. The Lord is our king. That's where we get the three organs of state: judiciary, parliament, and executive. You notice in Uganda, it's the other way around. The executive comes first, parliament comes second, judiciary comes last. But from the scriptures, it's the judiciary which comes first. He is the judge, first and foremost. He's a lawgiver, and he's a king. The kings in Israel understood it that way. They were judges. That's why the Lord would say, I've appointed David to judge my people. So justice came first. It was so important. Then when Solomon was praying, he said, Lord, you've made me leader of my people. Please give me wisdom to judge my people, because they understood that their responsibility as judge, very important. The king was always the chief justice, the supreme judge. And so they took it important that they would have the wisdom to judge people. That's why the king's palace was always called the king's court, because that's where he sat on the judgment seat, and then he would administer justice. Now, many people do not want to hear that God is a judge, and that one day every one of us will face him to account for our lives while on earth. I mentioned the fact that administering justice in the universe and among his people is God's primary responsibility. And it is he who has delegated it to some of his people. So now here we also saw number 2, that you are God's servant first. As a judge, as a magistrate, you are a servant of God first, and then an agent of the state. You will see that in 2 Chronicles 19:6, for you do not judge for man, but for the Lord. Our national motto, fortunately, brings that out: for God first, and then for my country. That is our national motto. Unfortunately, this is not emphasized in the recruitment or induction of judicial officers. When we got to this, the Chief Justice said, now we are going to involve you, and we're going to invite you in all the recruitments and the inductions. I liked that very much, because he said he's going to do that. Principle number 2, we saw that we want to be a nation under God and law. That's what Israel was like. We looked at that covenant, which I'm not going to repeat, because we covered that at length. The twofold covenant, where one is vertical and another one is horizontal. The vertical is between God, the people, and the king, and the horizontal is between the king and the people. We went through that, and we saw that that's what the American leadership looked at. Then we saw that the greatest achievement of humanity in the last millennium is the rule of law instead of the rule of rulers. This is very important. You cannot sustain freedom in any nation without the rule of law. The rule of law instead of the rule of rulers. If rulers generate law, that means you are in problems. Anytime they are annoyed, they come up with one law today, another law tomorrow. That's what the absolute monarch used to do. And nobody was safe, because anytime the king wanted your wife, he would take him. If he wanted your vineyard, he would take it. So the rule of law means that everybody is under the same law. For those of you who are more interested in politics, this will be a major issue when you become leaders in that sphere. The sphere of politics is to ensure truth and justice, but that justice cannot prevail without the rule of law. The judiciary is the custodian of the rule of law, because they study and interpret the law. Is God interested in that? Yes. The rule of law under God guarantees lasting freedom and democratic liberties. That's what really ensures it's more democracy is not independent by itself. It cannot ensure freedom. It's the rule of law that ensures freedom. If you just have democracy, meaning everybody chooses what they want, they can choose, but if there is no rule of law, you cannot steadily guarantee personal liberties. Margaret Thatcher said that being democratic is not enough. A majority cannot turn what is wrong into right. So in order to be considered truly free, countries must also have a deep love of liberty and an abiding respect for the rule of law. That was Margaret Thatcher was a Prime Minister of Great Britain. She ruled 3 terms. This being the greatest achievement of humanity in last millennium was very, very key. We covered that. Now, the rule of law covers these 4 elements. The rule of law is a durable system of laws, institutions, norms, and community commitments that delivers 4 universal principles. Accountability, meaning the government as well as the private sector are accountable to the law or under the law. Number 2, you have just law. The law is clear, publicized, and stable, and is applied evenly. It ensures human rights as well as property, contract, and procedural rights. This is what the rule of law is. So when we say we are a nation under God and law, this is what it means. Open government means the processes by which the law is adopted, the law is administered, the law is adjudicated, and the law is enforced are accessible, they are fair, and they are efficient. Then number 4, accessible and impartial justice. It means that justice is delivered timely by competent, ethical, and independent judiciary, if I would put it that way. That is the key issue. Those are the 4 elements that make the rule of law. What does it mean to have the rule of law? Durable system of laws, durable system of institutions are there. You have the law, but you have institutions like the judiciary, the police, where you can run if you have a problem. There are prisons where those who have been judged can be. These institutions are important. And then norms, meaning it is a accepted norm that when you have a problem, you go to the police and you expect to be helped. When that breaks down, then people will no longer trust police. When somebody steals, there will be mob justice. That is a serious problem. But then there is also a commitment by the whole community to that rule of law. So somebody aggrieved can run to court and expect justice. Families can go there, widows can go there, orphans can go there, even the lowest in the community can go there. This is what it means when we say a nation under God and law. We covered a bit of this. Now, I would need to explain something here. That sometimes when we were in school in history, we were taught that the democracy we practice came from Greece, which is not actually true. The democracy of Greece failed. It only worked in a few city-states, and when it condemned Socrates was a thinker. He said things people didn't like, and the majority voted that he should be killed, and was killed. His protege, Plato, wrote the book The Prince, and he condemned democracy. as the worst form of government, because he said that is mobocracy, the mob deciding, and instead advocated for a philosopher king. He said the best form of government is not democracy, because democracy, he said, is the worst form of government. So for him, he said we should have one person who's been made a philosopher and he's been informed, taught, trained, then he will ensure stability in the nation. So the protege of Plato, who was Aristotle, started to train Alexander the Great to become that model, the philosopher king. And when he implemented that idea, for Alexander to become a philosopher king, he thought that it would work. He would show the world that this is the best way to rule. Unfortunately, Alexander, although he had the best available philosophers as his mentors and advisors, he became one of history's most ruthless tyrants. And his successors even became worse, meaning, therefore, that the Greeks had nothing to pass on because they could not pass on the mobocracy or democracy. They didn't pass it on. Anywhere the Greeks ruled, there was no democracy. It was only in a few cities. They didn't pass on the philosopher king theory because it didn't work. So Europe, under the Greeks and later on under the Romans, had no ideal way of leadership. No political ideology from Europe really worked. So as the Greek democracy and Roman Republic failed, Europe plunged into the dark ages, wars, conflicts, and instability. So there was no ideal system therefore. So and so because they did fight, and one was defeating the other, and plunging into chaos today, tomorrow, and the other day, then Machiavelli came up with his book. Some of you who have read history, you may have heard about that man. That name is highly respected. Yet what he wrote wasn't really very good. He wrote his book and he called his theory that in that book called The Prince. He says that if a king tries to be good, he will only harm himself. He says a prudent ruler ought not to keep faith when doing so would only not be in his best interest. He should do what is necessary, fair or foul, to acquire and retain power, whether deception, intrigue, manipulation, violence, cruelty, even murder. Go ahead and do any of those things in order to acquire power and retain power. That was his idea. Use any method. The end justifies the means. So that was a big issue, because that book is always taught in among the historians and politicians as at that time it was the only solution, because Europe was in turmoil. Now, what changed is that the French Huguenots, these are the French Protestants, demanded that the institutions of society, as well as our individual lives, should be governed by the moral principles of the Bible. They insisted that this should include the state and the church. These French Protestants, or what we call the Huguenots, realized that the Saint Bartholomew's Day massacre, they were massacred on the 24th of August, 1572, when the Queen and the Pope joined hands to implement what Machiavelli had written 40 years earlier. Because the Queen was called Catherine, came from the same family of Lorenzo de Medici. Lorenzo de Medici was a very, very, very prominent family. It produced the Pope and produced the Queen of France at the same time. These were brother and sister who were leaders at the same time. One is the Pope, another one is the Queen. So when they joined forces, they said we have to get rid of these Protestants. Remember that time, the Reformation had just started. And so what they did was to hire Swiss mercenaries from Switzerland, surrounded the city, closed the city gates, killed and massacred the Protestants for 6 weeks. Those who survived were shocked. Not only them, actually, the whole of Europe was shocked by what the Queen did and the Pope, because the Pope had a mass arranged to thank God for killing the Protestants. So when the Huguenots rejected these ideas of Machiavelli, they started to search the Bible to find out how God wants us to govern ourselves. Out of that search came 3 books, which normally called the Trilogy of Freedom. These 3 books are very, very, very important, because what we enjoy today as constitutionalism, where nations have constitutions, comes from these 3 books. Proof of Law by Francois Hotman, The Power of Magistrates by Theodore Beza, and The Defense of Liberty Against Tyrants by Philip Monet. These 3 books laid the foundation for constitutional governance. Today, what we enjoy as freedom came as a result of their researching the Bible, saying, how do you want us to govern ourselves? That is where we get the emphasis for the rule of law instead of the rule of rulers, where the nations in Europe started to fight. There was a long period of fighting, 30 years. The 30 Years' War, which started in 1618 to 1648. We call it the 30 Years' War. That year war was a war of religion and politics. There was a combination. I won't go into the detail, but at the end, everybody was tired of the war. And the nations as we know them today came from that Treaty of Westphalia. That Treaty of Westphalia, Europe is tired of war. They have been implementing Machiavelli's principles. They haven't worked. Now they are all tired, and then they let it go. Nations are now free. The nations that you see in Europe, which became Protestant, are now freed. Those which were Roman Catholic, like Spain, like Italy and others, Portugal, they had been fighting to retain control over other nations. Those who are following the Huguenots' teaching were becoming free and free and free. People like John Calvin, teaching in Geneva, released so many disciples. Some of them, like this Theodore Beza was one of his proteges. He mentored Theodore Beza. John Knox, one man, went to Scotland and changed the whole nation. The Queen in Scotland said, I don't fear the armies of Europe. I fear the prayers of John Knox. One man, John Knox. Can you imagine? One man transforming the whole nation of Scotland. John Knox, so it became the Presbyterian nation after they implemented the teachings of John Calvin. Then other nations like the Dutch, today what we call Holland, had to fight about 75 years to be free from Spain. The Battle of Leyden, they had to go through those fights. The Spanish were so strong. In 1588, they attacked Britain, surrounded it with ships. The British went into prayer and fasting. They called it prayer and fasting. And the wind came from God, the storm. It hit all the ships, the Spanish Armada. All of them were destroyed, and only a few of them survived and went back. That's how Britain remained free from Roman Catholicism. So there were so many others, such incidents that took place in Europe to actually be free, because these monarchs and emperors were so strong and powerful, and they insisted that nations should honor them. Remember, the empire is a pagan idea. This is what the Roman Catholic theory promotes: empire. These nations were reading the Bible, the Protestants, and saying we are not supposed to be empire. We're supposed to be nations. According to Genesis 10, God destroyed empire in Genesis 11 in order to release nations. So why are we under this Spanish? For example, the Dutch in Holland are fighting for 75 years to be free from the Spanish, from the Spaniards. We want to be free, want to be a nation. The Switzerland and Holland were the first modern nations, biblical nations in Europe, and then followed by all the others. So when these nations became free, they got rid of emperors and kings, and instead they started to have prime ministers, chancellors in Germany. Prime minister in UK means chief servant, prime minister. It comes from Matthew chapter 20, verse 20. Jesus said, whoever shall be great among you shall be a servant. So they said, how does God want us to govern ourselves? He wants us to be servant leaders. So whoever wants to be great among you should be a servant. Whoever wants to be number one should be even greater servant, that is a slave. So that's how they came up with those terms like prime minister, prime servant, chief servant is the chief leader. Top leader is the top servant. So that's why we get the word prime minister. In 1649, when they defeated the King Charles. King Charles was the son of King James. Parliament of the Protestants fought him, and led by Oliver Cromwell, defeated him. And for 11 years, they turned it into a republic. They said, we get rid of these kings who are tyrants. Remember the book here that Philip Mooney had written was A Defense of Liberty Against Tyrants. So they came up with the Bible, which they called the Geneva Bible. The Geneva Bible had all these footnotes explaining how kings are tyrants, how they are contrary to the teachings of the Bible. That Geneva Bible was very, very popular during that time. Everybody was reading it because it was written in Geneva by the Protestants who were fighting tyrants, kings who are tyrants, emperors who are tyrants, rulers in Europe who are tyrants. This is the revolution that took place that changed everything, turning kings into, turning servants into leaders, overturning the whole system that was oppressing Europe. And the key was that the fact that the people are going back to the Bible, overthrowing the authority of man, replacing it with the rule of law based on the Bible. That rulers are also subject to the law of God. Rulers are also subject to the rule of law, the Bible, and the rule of law. So under God and under law. That's what I'm explaining now, under God and under law. So what today we enjoy as freedoms and liberties are a result of many, many, many years of fighting, a result of research done by these Huguenots. They contributed a great deal to the freedom that we have. Although France never embraced what these Huguenots, these French Protestants did, Americans benefited greatly because they implemented all these three books. That's why they have that system that they have today. a result of these 3 books. Later on, we have other French thinkers, but they came almost a generation later. The basic and the foundational teachings came from Martin Luther and these French Huguenots, who insisted that the freedoms of nations should be anchored in God, in the fear of God, that is under God, or the freedoms that are anchored in the rule of law rather than the rule of rulers. That is something that is very important. Now I'm going back to the principles that I was sharing with the judges. If you are God's delegate as a judge, then you must know his justice before you represent him. God's throne is established on righteousness and justice, based on Psalms 89, verse 14. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. He expects you to discharge your judicial duties on the same basis. This is how you also are established. Being established means you start as a magistrate, you go through the gauntlets of promotion up to the top. That is how you are established, not only in judiciary, but also in business. Anywhere you go, you start as an usher, you go through, become a pastor, and finally become a bishop. That's how you become established. You are required to act justly, principle number 4. And we saw that in Micah chapter 6, verse 8, that God requires judicial officers to act justly. It's not a suggestion, it's not an option, it's not an appeal, it's not a request, it's a requirement, and it's a command. Principle number 5, that judges and magistrates represent God, and so they should have honor. For you do not judge for man, but for the Lord. So we priests represent God in our priestly role, and therefore we are held in very high honor for that. People respect pastors, respect bishops, respect apostles. A man of God is in the house, and when you speak something, it takes place. God stands behind you. I gave them an example of Caiaphas sitting in the seat of a high priest. Jesus was before Annas and Caiaphas. When they brought him before them, he kept quiet. He didn't even answer when they were accusing him. This one, that one. They brought so many accusations which they could not substantiate or adduce evidence to. But Jesus never answered. The moment Caiaphas, the high priest, raised up his hand and said, I now adjure you in the name of God, tell us, speak. Jesus had to speak because he had to honor the high priest, because he had to honor the office. The reason he answered was not because he feared death, it was because he honored the office. His fear was not Caiaphas, his fear was God, on whose throne Caiaphas was sitting. Caiaphas was sitting on the throne in the office ordained by God. So even Jesus had to obey that. So priests are honored for sitting in that seat, and when they declare on behalf of God, what they declare comes to pass. By the way, you need to know that principle. It is repeated in Chronicles when Jehoshaphat is attacked, and attacked by an armies. They said you will be blessed when you honor God's prophets. He specifically talks about that you'll be blessed when you honor people who are sitting in God's office, serving in God's office. There is honor. When you respect his word, he honors you. So the judges, likewise, just like priests, are sitting in that seat. Judges, magistrates, judicial officers, they also represent God in their judicial role. So they give judgments on God's behalf. What a responsibility they have is tremendous, because they are accorded special honor because they represent God in that office. That's why they have those titles, Your Worship, My Lord. That's how you address the magistrates. You address them as Your Worship, My Lord. They are given in recognition of that. For us also, bishops, people use one of those titles, My Lord Bishop. The reason is because when when the Emperor Constantine, when Constantine became emperor, he called all the bishops who at that time were underground. He called them and said, I hear your courts are working better than the courts of the empire. I want all of you bishops to put on the garb of the Roman magistrates so that the people of Rome and the empire can come to you for justice. Our justice system is crumbling and failing. We want you to help us. So can you please be judges, be magistrates? And they accepted. So they started to put on those garbs of the Roman magistrate. That's why the people started to call them My Lord Bishop, the same way they were calling the magistrates. My Lord, at that time they used the term My Lord. So people also call us My Lord Bishop. Now these are titles which belong to God and God only. Worship belongs to God and God only. Matthew says so. Matthew 4:10 says, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. Hear, O Lord, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. So there is only one Lord. There is not many. So we see that when they are used in recognition of the fact that these people are sitting in the seat, in the office. So whoever dishonors you, therefore dishonors the one you represent, and that is God. That is a tremendous responsibility. Jesus explained it in John when he said, moreover, the Father judges no one, but has entrusted all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son, just as they honor the Father. Will not honor the Son, does not honor the Father, whose Father decided that his Son should be honored. But the only way he could ensure that was to make him a judge, because once you become a judge, they'll honor you. So he says he has entrusted all judgment to the Son. Why? So that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father. Whoever has justice is always honored. It is obvious that he represents the owner of justice, and that is God. The other principle is that one day everybody will give account to God, but especially the judges, the magistrates, they will give account for this prestigious office that they occupy. One day, they will account for every act of judgment they passed or failed to pass. And it is recorded in 2 Corinthians 5:10 that we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may receive the things done in the body according to what he has done, whether good or bad. So the greater the privilege and authority, the greater the responsibility that goes with it. So it is wonderful to enjoy that kind of prestigious position, but together with that position, privilege and authority, also comes greater responsibility. It carries great responsibility. That applies to us also, who are pastors, who are priests, who are apostles, prophets, because the greater the privilege, the greater the responsibility. So I told them that therefore they have to understand God and his justice system in order to represent him. The other principle we covered was the principle of impartiality. In Deuteronomy 1:17, says, do not show partiality in judging. Here both small and great alike. God's justice is executed impartially, and you have to treat all people equally. That's the rule of law. The rule of law requires that everybody is under the same law. It applies to them equally. The human tendency is to regard the great, the noble, the educated, the powerful, and the rich with deference. So you treat them differently because of the way they appear, wealthy, strong, educated, while the others are trodden underfoot. Now, impartiality requires that you treat them alike. Why? Men look at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. God goes to the heart of the matter. He does not look at outward appearance. He looks at the heart, both in choosing leaders and then in judgment. Very, very important. When Saul, while Israel wanted a king who would protect them, and their perception was outward appearance, he gave them Saul, who was head and shoulder above everybody else. He was the tallest and most handsome. He wanted to demonstrate to them the difference. So Saul was very impressive, very, very impressive. If he was a husband, all of you women here would follow for him. If he had been a wife, a woman, all of us men would have said, that's the wife I want. Meaning, from the outward appearance, Saul was the best Israel could produce in height, in beauty, handsomeness, and all that. That was the physical appearance. So when he gave them that king who appeared handsome, tall, muscular, all that, they were all for it. Saul represents that. The next king is David. David was the exact opposite. When Samuel was sent to Bethlehem to anoint one of the sons of Jesse to become king, the elder brothers of David, 7 of them, were brought before Samuel. They were all tall, strong, powerful, muscular. And God kept saying to Samuel, not that one, not that one, all of them, the 7. And then Samuel asked Jesse, is that all? He said, oh, there is another one. So he remembered the last one, number 8. 8 is the number of new beginnings. So David was brought. David was not as impressive as his brothers. He was small, rowdy, and he wasn't impressive at all physically. And so God told Samuel, don't choose any of the other 7. You are looking at the physical appearance like you did before when you anointed Saul. Now I'm showing you a man who is after my heart. So this time, it's not the physical appearance, it is the heart. So Samuel anointed David not based on the physical appearance, but on the heart. And to demonstrate this, in the next battle with the Philistines, another man who is even taller, bigger than Saul, who had come on the basis of his size, challenged Saul, and Saul could not stand. So if you base your leadership on size, you always have somebody who is bigger. If you base your marriage on just mere beauty, there will always be a more beautiful woman, more, Baganda, we say, abalungi ndagala namu tezigwa mu lusuku. So you don't base, those are not things you base your marriage, your leadership on. Physical appearance will always let you down because there will always be somebody who is better. There will always be something who comes. So it's all who, based on physical appearance, had his match in Goliath. Goliath came, and none of them could match him, including Saul. Saul could not face Goliath. David, who is not impressive at all, came and faced Goliath. Goliath was shocked. He said, Saul, you are really very abusive. How can you send me a dog? I told you to send me a man, and you've sent a dog. That's how Goliath said, I asked for a man. Send me a man whom can fight with, and you've instead sent me a dog. That's how he looked at David, because he was unimpressive at all. But that's what he called the dog, ended up beating him thoroughly because he was a man after God's heart, and the anointing of God was upon him, and he slew Goliath. So Saul is a man of the flesh. David is a man after God's heart. Solomon is the man of the mind. So those three kings ruled 40 years each. 40 years of Saul, 40 years of David, 40 years of Solomon. But each of them represents differently. We are spirit, soul, and body. Saul represents the flesh. David represents the heart. Solomon represents the mind. Now, in judgment, judging who becomes leader, it is the heart, but also the same with justice. So God's justice also is based on that. You have to get to the core of the heart of the matter in your probing if you're a judge. An example is Solomon, when two women were arguing that we are contesting for the baby. Each one saying, the live baby is mine, the dead one is yours. It was her word against the other. So nobody could tell who was telling the truth because there was no DNA testing. There was nobody who had seen these babies. So how can you judge such a case? Solomon had prayed to God and said, now that you've made me king, I'm the supreme judge in Israel. I'm the chief justice. Give me wisdom so that I can judge your people, so that they may get justice. So as chief justice, this case had gone through the lowest courts, and all of them had failed. So it got to the court of Solomon, the chief justice. He said, you split the baby into two, then so that these women can, we can end the argument. How he came up with that is the Spirit of God and wisdom. So the true mother immediately said, no. If this baby has to die, then no, let her rather have the baby. We cannot kill. The other one said, yes, let the baby be slain and split. So everybody could now tell who the true mother is. Because when you are dealing with justice, it has to be done, but it also has to be seen to have been done. It's not enough to do justice. It has to be seen to have been done. So everybody saw that it had been done because the true mother did not want her baby slain. The false mother said, okay, it's okay, let's split. So everybody could tell the true mother. And that is justice done, and they have seen to have been done. That is where the judicial, the impartiality comes from, because you get to the core of the heart of the matter. And finally, we covered this issue of the fear of God versus the fear of man. There are 4 types of fears. There's the natural fear. It is inborn. It's meant for our protection. You don't teach a baby to fear. The baby fears a stranger and cries. It is for his protection. The baby fears a fast-moving object coming next towards it because it is natural. It is for our protection. When we are on heights, you feel bad. It is intended. That natural fear is intended for our protection. You don't teach a rat to fear a cat. It is inbuilt. It is inborn. Even if the rat has never heard of a cat, the moment the cat cries, all the mice in the house will all run away. You don't teach a calf to fear a lion or a leopard. The moment the lion cries, all the cows and the calves will fear, natural fear. The second fear is the fear of man. This one is not from God. it's for show, it's to impress, it is hypocritical, it is pretense, dishonest, intended to please. Isaiah 29 says, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Remember, it's a difference between the heart and the mind. So this fear here is religious fear. Religious fear is not from God. Religious fear, the Pharisees, what you see the Pharisees doing, they pretend to be fearing God. They have all these religious activities, fasting. They sing about them, talk about them for sure. They show everybody that they are fasting. That one is religious fear or the fear of man. Jesus said, your traditions are not after God, they're after man. Then number 3 is demonic fear. It's also not from God. It is instilled by demons. 2 Timothy says, you have not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of a sound mind. So demonic fear is bad. Then the fear of God, reverential fear of God, God honors this one. And when it talks about Jesus, it says that when Jesus comes, the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him. That is the Christ. The spirit of the knowledge of the fear of the Lord, spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord. His delight is in the fear of the Lord, and he shall not judge by the sight of his eyes. So notice the connection between the fear of God and judgment. So as a judge, in order for Jesus to not judge by his sight, not decide by his hearing or his ear, he had to have the fear of God to save him from judging or fearing men, the sight, that is the sight of his eyes or the hearing of, because people can impress you by their sight, by their ear, what you hear them speak, and you may end up making mistakes. But Jesus, because he had the fear of the Lord, he would get to the hearts of men. It was the fear of the Lord which would save him from making such decisions. And says, but with righteousness he shall judge. Remember, you judge in righteousness and justice. So he judged in righteousness. And he decided with equity for the meek of the earth. So this is the core of ability to judge. So it's the fear of the Lord. When the fear of God permeates your understanding, you do not be afraid of any man, for judgment belongs to the Lord. So the fear of man here is contrasted with the fear of God. So a judge should discharge his duties in the fear of God, not the fear of man, because the fear of man brings a snare. Yeah? In Proverbs, he says the fear of man brings a snare. The fear of God, once it increases, will remove the fear of man and all the other fears, including the natural fear. Daniel is not afraid of the lions, natural fear. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are not afraid of the fire. That's natural fear. So the fear of God, once increases, it removes all the other fears, the demonic fear, the religious fear, or the fear of man, and the natural fear. The more it increases, it makes you serve God better, because you no longer fear man, no fear. Even the natural fear is subservient. The principle is that when two authorities above you clash, you obey the higher one. When two authorities clash, you obey the higher one. God is the highest authority. So anytime any of your superiors contradicts God, you are supposed to obey God. There is a very high price, however, to do that. Every time you obey the higher authority, you may end up being in very bad books of your immediate supervisor, your boss, or anybody who is in authority. Those are the 8 principles that we covered with the judges. Back to you, Bishop Kabuye.
Wow, thank you so much, Bishop. We all have benefited, and thank you, Bishop, when you really have shared with them You bring this to us, and we are so grateful. A lot of food for thought. I remember Billy Graham when he was still alive. He said, if you are to be effective as a minister of God today, you must have the Bible in one hand and the latest magazine in the other. Bishop, you remember that quote? So I look at this and I look at my modern day, our Uganda preachers, can I say in Africa, we really have to work hard, because with this knowledge, as you stand before these judges, this is when I believe they can respect a priest of God, a servant of God, not like the way we've been behaving, shouting and only praying in tongues and shouting, and they call us noisy. But when you come out with substance like this, when we have knowledge of the past, knowledge of the law, knowledge of, that's a balanced gospel I believe we must have. Like the Bible says, is it in Malachi 2:7, that a priest is required to be knowledgeable. We are required to be knowledgeable of the word of God. So saints who have been here, I know we have been blessed. We've been blessed. We still have some, no, we don't have. Time is gone. I wonder whether you have some questions. Maybe we can